I'm very pleased to introduce my guests for this masterclass, Claire Wright, HR Director of Jardine Motors Group, and Sarah Noble, Director, Deloitte Consulting, Supply Chain Transformation for Automotive. Welcome to you both, Claire and Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to talk about how simply aiming to recruit more women might not be enough to get a gender balance. We actually have to recalibrate our organisations for inclusion to ensure that women will thrive, and design working practices for productivity, not presenteeism. We will each give a short talk on the subject, and then I will ask Claire and Sarah questions to explore their thoughts on the matter. First, I'll set the context for the discussion. So the organisations we work in today are not designed to deliberately exclude women, but because they were originally designed to suit a 20th century man, there will still be practices in place that create a barrier to female participation. And also many young men with different lifestyles to their fathers could face the same barriers. Organisational structures, policies and practices must be consciously designed for inclusion, and working norms must drive inclusive behaviour. Facilities have to be provided for women. That's a pretty basic one, but it's amazing how few companies make the effort. It's a signal that a place isn't designed for women if they don't have toilet facilities in the same number or same proximity as men. For example, workshops in car dealerships often have only male toilets, forcing female technicians to use customer facilities further away. Employers must also invest in the necessary PPE for women and, most importantly, ensure it fits properly. Work must be repositioned to be what we do, not where we go. Remote or hybrid or blended working will enable more women to access fulfilling careers. Flexible and agile working is becoming more popular, and PwC found in their 2017 report that it was in the top 3 most important criteria for selecting a job for both men and women. If we change the default to flexible working, forcing an opt-out rather than an opt-in, more workers will take it up. It's no longer a woman's issue. It shouldn't lead to gender-specific career penalties. Flexibility becomes a default. It becomes pay for performance, not face time. Remuneration should reward quality and teamwork rather than competing with peers and customers. Commission-based remuneration systems that shift the business risk onto the employee are not attractive to women and also many men. They can damage productivity and customer satisfaction due to the insecurity and intra-team competition they generate, and should be replaced with objectives and clear expectations of output in return for a fair salary. This would attract a more diverse pool of recruits for sales roles. Flatter organisation structures are more inclusive. Command and control management styles and hierarchical military-type structures stifle creativity, and they fail to utilise the organisation's collective intelligence. The flatter the structure, the more women are likely to be more visible to those more senior. So leaders must consciously design the organisation for the inclusion of women and minority groups and ensure that there aren't systems in place that inadvertently exclude them. When you've recalibrated the workplace for inclusion, you'll be ready to recruit and welcome in the women. So how can we ensure we are recruiting fairly and equitably? By scrutinising recruitment and selection processes and monitoring success rates by gender and ethnicity at each stage to ensure there's no bias built into a particular step. A good practice is to remove gender and diversity cues from application forms. Recruiters must aim to increase the number of female applicants, and they must examine the language and imagery used in job descriptions and adverts, and promote vacancies where women will actually see them, including those who aren't actively job seeking. Induction programs must be designed to make women feel welcome if they're trailblazing by entering an environment with very few female colleagues. Companies must be transparent about pay in job adverts. Studies have found that women are less likely to apply for a role where the salary isn't transparent. This is because they may overestimate the status of the job and are less likely to take the risk of being rejected if they're uncertain about the status of the role, and are less likely to think that they'll be successful in a salary negotiation than a man. So don't use unnecessary criteria also that narrow the applicant pool to a small population. Men are much more likely to apply for roles where they don't meet the criteria than women. And this is a possible reason why recruiters think there are no available women. Never use criteria that you're willing to overlook when no one meets them. Also, don't confuse experience with expertise. It's standard protocol to ask for 5 years' experience in a role, rather than seeking evidence for expertise. Yet we all know people who ace their jobs within 6 months and are quickly ready for promotion, when others may take 5 years to reach the same competence. Requiring the candidate to have stayed years in a job is effectively showing a preference for a plodder. Conflating experience with expertise is a lazy approach to recruitment. Aim for gender balanced shortlists. Researchers found that when there is only one female in the recruitment pool, it's extremely unlikely she will be offered the job, even if she is the best candidate. This is because she's seen as a risky anomaly. Even putting one other woman in the pool raises the chances of either woman being successful based on their own performance, because they're no longer seen as a deviation from the male norm. So those are some of the changes that we can implement to recruit and better accommodate women. So in a few moments, we'll hear from Claire about the actions taken by Jardine Motors Group. But first, I'd like to hand over to Sarah to outline some key findings from the Women at the Wheel study that suggest that the design of automotive organisations is not effectively including women or enabling their progression. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Julia. So I think we can all agree when we look at the study that we did, which is the Women at the Wheel, Women in Automotive 2020 study. We released it in November 2020. I think we can all agree that some of those numbers really are not a great reflection of the industry, and we absolutely want the industry to be doing better. So we ran the study back in the summer of 2020. We have feedback from over 100 individuals, OEM suppliers, dealers, across all grades and experience levels. And we specifically wanted to look at measuring how do women feel about the future of the automotive industry, but also what are the personal, organizational, industry-wide challenges to actually retaining and advancing women within the industry that we all kind of care so much about. I think there's some really interesting findings we took away from that. So on a positive, 68% of women, they feel like there has been a change for the better in the industry looking at the past 5 years. So clearly, though, as I go through some of the numbers, there are some things for us to work on. There is a wider field that we are doing better than we have been doing over the past 5 years and beyond. Now, that said, nearly 50% of our respondents feel unprepared to navigate the future of the industry, and I think that's really concerning. 40% would choose a different industry altogether if they could go back. And a lot of those top reasons are they feel there's a lack of promotion opportunities, there's organization and cultural norms holding them back, there's a really poor work-life balance, and just actually, a broader one, which is just uncertain industry future and what it means. I think 90%, this is not shocking to anyone, but 90% felt women were underrepresented at leadership levels. I'm probably more interested in the 10% that didn't think that, but 90% thought that they're underrepresented. And a big part of that is they just think there is an industry bias towards men in leadership positions. And it's those organization and cultural norms that I referenced that are really driving that. So if we take that, and those are pretty high percentages for a single industry in automotive for us to be thinking about. And they're a poor reflection of the fact that we have a lot more gender diversity at the junior grades in a lot of these companies. And so it's how do we take that? How do we kind of fight against those bias and norms that seem to exist, and really push for change going forward? And so, what are some of the things we need to do better on is one of the things to focus on. So the first that we really talk about is how do we think about flattening the hierarchy? So we want to make participation, engagement, promotion of diversity, inclusion, that needs to be a responsibility of every level and every function. And I know Claire's going to talk about kind of what they've done at Jardine, and coming from an HR side, I think it's really important, but it needs to be more than just an HR discussion across the business, right? It needs to be a strategic imperative. And then, but it is about creating clear policies at all organization levels. So people need to feel protected. They need to feel that there are workplace policies that truly are driving that equality. There is a culture that doesn't tolerate discrimination. Um, really think about learning and development to get everyone to understand those policies, to engage with them, and to really start to drive that cultural change. I think a key one is defining and measuring success. So we talk a lot in the study about the fact that often there are kind of one or two metrics that look at this. They're relatively short term in nature, whereas the reality of this is it's a long term journey. A lot of organizations need to think about this as many steps to get down to the end result. And it needs to be part of like a broader business strategy that is, 5-10 years plus in terms of bringing your company on kind of that entire journey. So I think there's many things that can be looked at and change. And I know as we talk through today, I'm going to tell you a bit more about some of the detailed kind of curves and strategies we've seen different organizations use to start to bring some of that change about.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And so you say it's a long-term journey. So maybe Claire, can you share with us, what's happened at Jardine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we started our journey about 5 years ago, and the data that you shared, Sarah, was very similar to something we did on a much smaller scale 5 years ago to try and understand what we needed to do. But we have focused a lot on the culture, and it has to start with culture, as you've said. And it's not, there has to be policies and processes in place. But if the culture isn't there, and the senior managers are just nodding their heads and saying we have to do this because it's the right thing to do, then no one's going to win. So we've been very much working on our culture. I'm really fortunate, our board are really bought into this. So are all of our senior managers. And I think that's why we achieved 30% of women in management roles within sort of a 2.5-3 year period. But that was down to a lot of joint effort. So, one of the things I want to really say, this isn't just a HR initiative, and it cannot be. The reason it's been successful is because everybody's owned it. We have done things from a HR perspective, as you've said, reinforce our policies, change our policies, but things like partnering with organisations like, the Automotive 30% to help lift and raise the profile of what we're trying to do in the motor industry, but also partnering with people like Retail Week, Be Inspired, because for us it was also important to look externally what other organisations are doing and where do you benchmark, and having that external lens makes a huge difference. Internally, we have had a Women in J&G group that's actually now disbanded because we've really started to focus since the end of last year on inclusion in totality. But when you look at gender, that goes through everything, whether you're a black female, how do we ensure that we cover everything? Speakers for Schools was another big piece that we embarked on, and again, just to help that change of perception. But it is through sharing stories and having colleagues along with me who work at the front line to talk about actually the opportunities that are there. Because I think, unfortunately, the industry still has a stigma attached to it that you go and work there if you're not particularly bright or academic, which, as we all know, is complete rubbish. The way that the sector is changing is considerable, and you need people with more innovation, etc., etc. But the big thing for us as well is the consistency around our employee branding. So us as a brand, what do we stand for, and how do we ensure that inclusion and gender diversity in the early day was a real key focus. And that was about highlighting our success stories, sharing the stories from our females. So again, it's not just the HR director talking about it, it's everyone in our business. And whilst COVID, nearly a year ago when it all kicked off, has been horrendous for most businesses, one of the things that it has enabled us to do is really force through our flexible working policies, because actually we've all proven it isn't about presenteeism. A large proportion of our colleagues now can work from home very successfully. And we've seen through our recruitment campaign that we ran last year when we were recruiting Small Connection Centre colleagues, we've now got a large proportion of those working from home, and we've attracted people that we wouldn't normally attract because we are able to be more flexible. And equally, in our dealerships, through our online offering now, we've actually got part-time brand ambassadors, because actually the interaction is online, and therefore the need to have physical presence in a dealership is being negated through the customer journey. So there's lots there that we've done, and it's evolved, and I think that's a really important thing to say. And I think, Sarah, you said it as well. It's not a, you know, a one size fits all, and it's not a silver bullet. You have to focus on the things as you go through, but the biggest single thing for me is you have to focus on the culture, and that culture has to be aligned right from the top and the bottom up piece as well.
That's really useful insight, Claire, thanks. And I also know that you've done a lot of work in Jardine to recruit women. So maybe can you share some of the key actions that you've taken, maybe to reduce bias or ensure women find the roles you find that you advertise attractive?
Yeah, and it comes back to the brand piece. So, you know, the narrative that we have around our organisation is highlighting those successful females, because actually that's what you need to do. And whilst we have moved the needle, you know, don't get me wrong, there's still quite a bit that we need to do, you know, in terms of our succession and planning, which we look at on a quarterly basis. I don't have the next brand director there available at the moment, but you have to be realistic about it. But I am, you know, fortunate in Jardines because of the culture. We didn't have any of this whole thing where we've had to remove people's names from CVs because there was a bias. It was a woman, she can't do the job. You know, we have genuinely been lucky that we've not had to do that. But it has been about how do you build that brand and that strategy to outwardly show people what it's about, remove the perception. So what is like a day in the life of this type of role, but now further enhancing that in terms of, you know, we can now offer more flexible working and what that looks like, but equally also helping train managers to embrace the fact that, you know, this doesn't have to be a 9 to 5 role. We can do it a bit differently. And we've don't get me wrong, we've had stories in our organisation where we've had to sort of call people out and say, you know, just a minute, it doesn't matter that this lady, you know, isn't going to be able to come into a dealership 5 days a week. She can do 3 days a week, and that's fine. And you know, and it really does come back to the culture in the business and how you attract and how you tell the stories. But equally on internal promotions, we have to recognise that we do have to be more proactive with our female colleagues, and they do need a bit more of a nudge to say, you know, you should apply for that job, you are very competent, you can do the job. So it's a combination of, if it was to summarise, of how you sell the story and what your brand is about around everyone has an opportunity and what that means for females in particular in this scenario, but equally within your internal talent, how you keep monitoring and motivating females to apply for roles.
Great, thanks, Claire. And so, Sarah, moving back to you again, your report made for quite sobering reading, and it shows that there's much work to be done in many other companies. And you identified a D&I maturity spectrum, and that companies are at different points on the spectrum. So could you describe for us those main phases that businesses go through on their journey to inclusion, please?
Yeah, happy to. And I think it's really important you think about how, you know, we advance women, that you know, as Claire and I have both agreed, it is a journey. And so I think we find the maturity spectrum, which is in the study, it really helps organizations think about the fact that there are steps to take on this journey, and it's really important to think about them as steps along the way. So, you know, we view it as kind of 5 key steps. So the first one is being just compliant. So that means you've looked at the basics and you've put in place a policy against whether it's sexual harassment to equality, and just you are compliant with, really some of these are just legal requirements, as well as kind of cultural requirements for the basics. The second step is getting into emergent. So you're starting to think a bit more about how do you put in place some additional policies, how do you start to change some of the dialogue that's happening. And then you move on towards embracing, and that's where we really start to see your organization is embracing this as a discussion topic. Individuals are starting to, you know, open up the dialogue and really engage on what this needs to look like for your organization, and really start to kind of, you know, manage that inclusive and diverse workforce in a positive way. And then the fourth and fifth step are really where we get to, you're truly in a collaborative organization, and then you're in a truly inclusive organization. And I think it's really important that none of these are they're not, as Claire so rightly said, a silver bullet. There isn't one to get from each step to the next. And I think you can be at different levels across different areas within each of these steps. But it's really important to think about the fact that it's a journey, as we've said. And these give organizations a bit of an ability to, recognize some of what those steps look like, build this into their business strategy as we talk about that multi-year plan. I really want to see is people kind of engaging with it and moving up the spectrum over the course of a period of time. And it helps them start that dialogue that is also important with the wider organization around what they want to do. And it gives them a starting place.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Claire, you're the winner of our Inspiring Automotive Women Inclusive Leader Award. And it seems to me that Jardine is pretty far along the spectrum to an inclusive culture. But where would you say Jardine is on the D&I maturity spectrum? And what's been the biggest challenge that you faced had to overcome to achieve it?
I'd say we are quite high on the spectrum, and over the last couple of years we've been really lucky in that we have been recognised externally and won a number of awards. But I don't think you can ever become complacent in all of this. You have to keep going, and I think, if I'm honest, that is the biggest challenge about how you keep that continued energy to keep the message going and beating the drum. And because especially during tough times, it's easy to say this stuff will have to just take a back seat. We need to focus on business performance. But if you do that, all that good work then goes away. So, for us, it is about how we're extending the wider inclusion agenda, but we still have to keep looking every month at our succession, our pipeline, looking at who's applying for jobs internally and externally. It forms part of our monthly MI pack. We review it from a data point of view, as well as from the anecdotal stuff that we see in the business. But it is, I think the biggest challenge is how you keep the energy to keep going and how you never stop. And what's the next iteration? How do you reinvigorate what you're doing? So one of the big things that we started to do at the back end of last year was, rather than this, me chairing all of our women in JMG meetings, we've now got a much wider group of people who are now beating the drum in the businesses, and I'm saying, come on, you tell us what we now need to do. And they're coming up with small things. It's not wholesale change that we need to make, but it's just that continued, right, okay, how do you look even deeper now in our organization, in dealership roles, for example, to make them more flexible? So we've gone some way, but are we fully there? No, we're not. And I think you have to keep gaining that feedback from people on the ground who are doing the jobs every day and seeing customers, to try and really understand what is next and what do we need to do next. And that's really our plan moving forward.
And in terms of what to do next, what will be the next action that you undertake to sustain this?
It comes back to succession and talent planning, really. That's a big focus for us again this year, and continuing with the sharing the success stories and getting our female colleagues to stand up and be counted. And again, that takes effort, because sometimes it's a bit like, I now need to go and give this person a nudge, when why are they not putting their hand up themselves, because we've got a great culture. But you still have to do it. And as I've already said, the big thing for us next is our wider expansion of D&I over and above just gender, but with the different lenses of the different spectrums in terms of diversity and inclusion, and thinking about truly putting ourselves in the shoes of a young Black female, for example. How do we really get beneath that, and what else do we need to do? So we're really in this phase now of further listening events to a cross range of colleagues to what we can do next.
And so back to you, Sarah, about the study. You mentioned that 40% of the respondents would actually choose a different career if they could start over again. Do you think that this is an indication that companies perhaps have put energy into attracting and hiring women, but haven't recalibrated the culture and structure to ensure that they'll thrive and progress? Do you think that they haven't realised that they have to change?
I think, I think the short answer is yes. And it's definitely true that we found that 40% would choose not just a different career, but an entirely different industry that they would go into. And there's something important here about how we think about kind of building that resilience of both the individual and the organization. Now, I don't want anyone to think that, I mean, you have to tough enough, stick it out. That's absolutely not the message to take away. But I do think that there is an organization and an individual, it's resilience about being able to talk about this, and being able to build that is about engaging in the dialogue, right? I think especially at Women at the Wheel, we found that just starting that discussion of shared experience, common purpose is really important to getting people to think about the journey that needs to be happening. And I think it's really important as we talk through that yes, a lot of work has been done to bring women into the industry. But as you say, like if they're saying that they don't feel like that they can have promotion opportunities, if they feel like they can't have an appropriate work-life balance, if they feel like that there are cultural norms just sitting there in the industry preventing them from being successful, then that's change that needs to happen. Some of the simplest first steps that we see when we start to think about that D&I spectrum and moving along from emergent and down the line are things like mentor and sponsor relationships. They are a great first step, but they're not the only step. They have a lot of value. There's a lot they can bring to our organization, but we see a really inconsistent approach to this as well. And I think, they tend to be like, okay, I've done that, check the box. I don't have to do anything else. And that's really not what any organization is going to find to be successful. The reality is the reason this hasn't happened is because it's hard and it's not quick. The reality we have is, it's easier sometimes to say nothing than to figure out the right thing to say. However, we need people to figure out the right thing to say, and just saying and being an advocate to bring some of those cultural norms down and change them is really, really important. And that's what we need, both, as Claire has said, top and bottom, to be happening to really start to drive that change.
And we know that we're still in a position where there are fewer women being hired and fewer women being promoted than men. So what do you think the main reason is? You first, Sarah, perhaps.
And look, I think recruitment at junior levels is heading in the right direction. There's always more that we can do, and there will always be more we can do. And as Claire said, it's keeping that dialogue going and continuing to focus on it. And that is hard, absolutely. But I think it's really about both real and perceived barriers sitting within an organization. And I think it's about breaking those down. It's about individuals kind of take that on and make a truly conscious decision to somewhat fight that battle. And sometimes it can be, being honest, and from a personal experience, it can be a bit of a hard and sometimes lonely road into senior leadership. But we need individuals who want to engage in that. And they need advocates to help them do that, because as I think we've all said the whole way through, this isn't just a women's issue. This is an organization, this is an industry issue that we need people to start to get on board with and be part of that dialogue that needs to be existing. And I think honestly, the main reason is we don't have enough people stepping up to do that.
And what do you think, Claire? What do you think is the main reason?
Yeah, I guess building a little bit what Sarah just said, for me, what I observe, even in our business sometimes, is the perceived and perceived barriers, because if it's a perception, that's your reality, isn't it? And often people put, females unfortunately put things in front of them which actually don't really need to be there. And the mentoring relationships and the advocates are so important to help remove those, but also organisationally, how do you remove those barriers where there's a perception that person, as I said before, has to be at the desk 5 days a week. So it's about asking different questions to hiring managers when you've got a space to fill. Saying, what can this be like, rather than saying, no, tell me why it can't be. And often when you start asking managers different questions, you often get different responses. And for us, when we've done some campaigns in terms of our academy campaigns in the past, towards the sort of third campaign, we were really getting a good 50-50 split of male and females applying. But that was because you need people to tell others about the reality. You need people waving the flag for you, not just the HR director, or not just a load of blurb on your careers page about we are inclusive organisation. You have to put your money where your mouth is, and people have to really see it. But I still think there's a lot we need to do, and we have to still be very proactive with our female colleagues, whether we like it or not, and keep nudging them and giving them confidence to do, and ask those different questions to the business about how can these roles be performed differently.
And so, to summarise then, what advice would both of you give to our audience about the importance of starting to take action now to recruit more women and recalibrate the organisation to effectively include them? So, Sarah, over to you first, please.
So I think the theme for International Women's Day, March 8th this year, is choose to challenge. And that one probably resonates with me more than quite a few of our past year themes, to be honest. And to me, this means about choosing to be an advocate for this equality every day. And the reality is change is hard. And, choosing to set an example and be that advocate and speak up sometimes is really hard, but we all need to be doing that, and we all need to be playing that role. And it's just really important. And I think each of us have to be the example we want to see happening from others.
And Claire, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Sarah, not wanting to repeat what she said, but that challenge piece is so, so important. We can all attend great events like this, hear from lots of great people, hear lots of good research, but unless you're willing to take action, challenge your organisations and actually take some action, then, you've only got yourself to blame when change doesn't happen. It is about taking action. It is about truly emotionally connecting and investing in this sort of stuff. You can't do it from a box ticking exercise or a paper exercise. You have to immerse yourself in it to make the change happen. And challenge would be the single biggest thing I would say that people need to do to take real action.
Great. And it's so important that everybody realizes that we have to start now. If you haven't already started, we need to start moving. So that brings us to the end of this session. Claire and Sarah are going to actually be joining us in the final session of the day. So please do submit questions that you'd like them to answer. And until then, thanks very much to Claire and Sarah for sharing your expertise in this masterclass. I hope everyone's going to now stay tuned to watch our third masterclass about promoting and retaining women after the break.